Welcome to National Arts. I'm Mike Baker. The National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C., under the directorship of Mstislav Rostropovich, has gained national and international prominence in recent decades. With Rostropovich's retirement, who better to pick up the baton than the highly acclaimed Leonard Slatkin? As longtime conductor of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, Slatkin brings to Washington an extensive discography, 50 Grammy nominations, and renown as a champion of American music. Mr. Slatkin, I guess the question that everybody asks is why from the gateway to the west to the nation's capital?
It's not as easy as just a move. I had decided for, well, quite a while that it was time to leave St. Louis. 17 years as music director, 27 years altogether in relationship with the orchestra. And at the time when I made that decision, I really had no idea what the next project was going to be. The first child was on the way. I was about to turn 50. I thought, well, just freelance for a while. And when I finally did make the decision, it was then that representatives of the National Symphony Orchestra came to see me about the possibility of coming here. Over the course of those discussions, the nature of the position and the job here was so markedly different than what I had been doing in St. Louis that it did seem attractive. I wasn't interested to go and more or less do the same thing again. Build up an orchestra, get it some attention within its own community and nationwide, and this didn't really hold an attraction. There were other orchestras out there that were looking for that. What the National Symphony provided was a different kind of forum, a place where you were part of an overall art scene, especially self-contained within the Kennedy Center, that just is very rare to find in this country. It was a chance to place a mark on what the national scene for music could be, and to build a situation where not just orchestra life, but the artistic life, performing arts in particular, could have a broader role and impact on what people throughout the country saw as part of their own lives.
You also were quoted as having said that this will provide you a broader forum and that will also offer you exposure not only musically, but also as an art voice in the preservation of the symphony orchestra.
Well, the orchestra, as many other arts institutions in this country, are experiencing a degree of problem in terms of image, in terms of the presentation within their own communities and to the nation as a whole. If in Washington you can create an atmosphere that says that the orchestra of the nation's capital is a prime force in the country, it sends a very positive and good message for all those orchestras out there that are struggling. And the NSO has had its image problems over the years. It is sometimes thought of as a plaything for the rich constituents that are here. And at the same time, here we are in this wonderful edifice of the Kennedy Center, supposedly devoted to the living, breathing arts, where things seem to be a little bit at a stale time. Money is tight, touring organizations are cutting back, the orchestral life is not as rich as it was in the last 15 years or so. So I think the overall position of an orchestra now is to redefine itself for its community and therefore to the nation as a whole. And I can do that here in Washington, whereas I don't think I could do it pretty much any place else.
The arts are going through an era of political correctness, and it's even been said that symphony orchestras have to have this in mind. Is that true?
We are thought of as bastions of dead, white, male Europeans. And what we have to do, simply to bring ourselves in line with other institutions artistically in the country, is to place ourselves among the living, breathing human beings, to bring our art of the past into line with other elements of culture, and for ourselves to learn and draw more from those cultures themselves. We have to become part of our community. We can't be isolated anymore.
You've said that if we are to survive, we have to make some fundamental changes.
Yes.
Is that part of what you're talking about here?
I'm talking about an orchestra in the future that is not just a conglomerate of 100 players that get together 40-something weeks of the year, but go out as individuals into their communities. They're involved in teaching, they're involved in amateur music making in the community, they're involved in pulling together as many resources of their own communities to create music, to bring as many people into our world, and at the same time learn from the other cultures that are out there.
I'm thinking of two particular examples where you demonstrate what the critics say you are, and that is very imaginative and a great interpreter. I was thinking of one Kennedy Center concert that you did here of Gustav Mahler's Unfinished Symphony No. 10. You made a whole evening out of it. Critics raved about that. Then I'm thinking about the program in the St. Louis area of In Unison that you do when working with the churches. I mean, is this part of the whole effort to get the message out there and to be different?
I think I will adjust a lot of my thinking because Washington and the district and the areas of Virginia and Maryland are quite different. But yes, the answer is look and see what you believe your community needs, address those needs in terms of being an orchestra, address the changing audience. You have an elderly audience which sort of wants to hear the same 75 pieces over and over. We won't neglect those responsibilities, certainly, but at the same time, we're in competition with every other media. Sports, television, motion pictures, whatever it happens to be. So we have to find ways in the concert hall to bring people out, to get them away from what is at home. We have to find something that is different. Part of that for me has to do with talking with the audiences about the music, sometimes before a concert, sometimes during it. Sometimes we will present family concerts. Sometimes we will incorporate other people on the stage from different areas of musical and cultural experience. It should be a much more diverse view of music than we have traditionally had.
You've said conductors of the future have to talk to their audiences, and you're setting a trend here, aren't you?
Well, I think at least those who are capable of doing it need to do it. There are conductors, of course, who are not comfortable, and therefore they shouldn't do it. One of the things I do is to share my thoughts with audiences, to say, this is what I believe this music represents, this is how I view it, and here are the options. Here are some alternative ways for you to listen as well. One thing we'll be doing a little bit later in the 95-96 season is to present a version of Pictures at an Exhibition where each movement is orchestrated by a different person. And it's preceded with a lecture demonstration of how the different movements sound in the hands of different people. So we don't take a work like that that is so familiar to our regular audiences. We don't take this kind of piece for granted anymore. And I'll probably do more and more of that. A Fifth Beethoven Symphony, Elgar's Enigma Variations, certain works that just have become so common that we've perhaps forgotten what their genesis was and the inspiration behind it, and perhaps a re-looking, so that the audience is as involved as participants, not just passive listeners.
In essence, we have to really throw out our preconceived notion of what the classical music audience is in order to gain new audiences, in order to do what you've done in St. Louis, and that is get a much younger following.
I don't know if we have to throw it out, but I think we have to present music in a way that illuminates and perhaps gives you additional information to what you have in your own experience. Look, you can't go anywhere in this country, a mall, an elevator, whatever. There's always music. Bernstein said people constantly hear music, but they don't listen. Our job in the concert hall is to make people listen, and part of listening is understanding what goes behind the creative spirit, the muse that put that work there in the first place.
In addition to the multicultural repertoire that you talked about, you've also been quoted as having said that we have to, as symphony orchestras, develop a certain video value or values. What exactly does that mean?
The younger generation, which now means generation before mine, which is one time I wouldn't have said that, is one that has been raised on and has been part of the video revolution. So people come to concerts, young people in particular, and sometimes they're not so comfortable just looking at this group of 100 people on the stage, dressed in the funny outfit, and not being able to really see them as individuals. It's not cut shots anymore, it's just sort of like a painting where you see some people moving arms and sound coming out. I think part of the presentation of music, not all of it of course, but part of it will be to enter the video age in some way. Other arts institutions have done it. The opera companies, what's the device they've used to bring people back in? Titling. Museums use interactive television technology to get people more in touch with the spirit of what happens. A place like the Center is a perfect example where we should give people as much information as possible through television, or at least through monitors, some interactive media that goes on. I don't even mind it at some concerts that we position a couple cameras, have a few screens where people really can see what the individuals are doing in the course of a piece of music.
Especially the soloists.
Soloists?
Yes.
The oboe, somebody back there in the drums, just so the audience has an idea of what goes on. It wouldn't be for every concert, but just a few, so that it's understood that there is more to it than just seeing and hearing 100 people playing.
Had you not ventured into conducting, I know your other two professional choices were teaching and broadcasting. Those put you in pretty good stead when it comes to the symphony orchestra of today.
Part of my experience was actually in radio in particular. Recently it's moved into television. One of the things I do in St. Louis is to have a show that comes on at 4:30 in the morning on Monday talking about the programs for that week, and the numbers are pretty good. You know, we're highest rated show in our time slot.
45,000 people tape
minimum,
it.
minimum.
Unbelievable.
Some weeks it's been 75,000. Which means it's more people that can actually physically come to the concert, more people than the hall can accommodate. Shows me that the interest is there. If you do something creative, if you use the technology, people will at least get the idea that you're presenting something that could be of interest. I see no reason that the Center, for instance, can't have a weekly show. This week at the Kennedy Center, some weeks it's me talking about the orchestra, some weeks it might be Placido talking about the opera, somebody else talking about theater, film, whatever it happens to be. Give people the information and present it in a way that makes it appealing.
This is all with education in mind, isn't it?
Yes, it's
That's the whole idea.
The arts essentially are an educational process. We may create new intriguing works, but ultimately if they really are intriguing, they become part of history. So what we preserve from the past is equivalent to what we are trying to present now, which may become the past.
Called the champion of American composers. Is this an effort not only from your love, obviously, as a young child when you heard all these American composers being played, but is it an effort perhaps to generate a little bit more of this nationalistic spirit here in our own country and a certain love for our own symphony music?
I think we do tend to think of our music as sort of second-class citizenry, and we do that, I suspect, because European orchestras haven't embraced the repertoire at all. Either it's technically too complicated, or they're not in sympathy with it, or perhaps the diversity of styles is a little more complex for Europeans than it should be. In this country, though, it's very important, as it is in any country, to understand what the heritage is. We need to see the composers that come before the turn of the century to understand the European heritage that they brought. We need to examine Ives and his followers, who tried to bring American music as a unique concert experience, and then all the composers that have come since, some of them nationalistic, some of them academic, some of them looking for new voices altogether, mixing medias. I'm proud of the music that's been written in this country in the past, and I have very good hopes for the future. As an American, it seems to me quite essential, especially leading an orchestra in the nation's capital, that American music become a regular part of the repertoire and takes the place side by side the European masters that have dominated for all these years.
3 Grammys, over 50 Grammy nominations, and how heartwarming that a good many of them were garnered recording American composers.
Yes, well, about half of the output for me with St. Louis anyway was American, and that will continue here as well. We're looking already at the first disc being recorded in the 95-96 season. It will be American, it will be contemporary, and my record company, BMG, most people know it as RCA still, has a great commitment to the NSO's participation in the American repertoire itself. That's where the crystal ball would come in handy to see which is going to really connect with the public, but we think we have a few good ideas.
Another plus, you're wonderful with young people. I know you love teaching. A great example was the 1990 tour with the Soviet American Youth Orchestra.
Mm-hmm. I do like teaching, maybe because as a youngster I had it ever since I was 0 years old in my family. Ultimately, the future of what we do in music depends very much on how we educate our young people. Now that I'm a new father, I'm thinking very seriously about how I bring my child along. I don't want to force him into anything, but I see he's already developing at least some skills in listening. He really enjoys just sitting by the CD player or the radio and just intently listening to what's going on. So I might use him as a barometer as I go on through these years of how to reach other young people.
What a wonderful atmosphere you grew up in, not only exposed obviously to American composers, but the great European composers. And the string quartet in particular, it doesn't surprise me that you have a fondness for Haydn.
Well, I did grow up fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, in a family where music was the dominant factor. The Hollywood String Quartet was what I heard every night when they rehearsed in their home. But the daytimes were interesting too, because my parents were in the film industry, so I could go over to a soundstage and see what was going on, or go over to Capitol Records and see a Sinatra session. We had quite a background, quite an upbringing of all embracing musical schemes. Nothing was barred from the household. We heard everything. We met these people. So I think that's maybe a key to my working with young people. I tend to keep up with trends of the time. I may not like every form of music that I hear, but at least I try to know something about it.
In 1964, you would have never dreamed of venturing into conducting, even though you'd studied with your father, because you didn't want to be compared to him, essentially.
I didn't want to be competitive with him. Comparison is inevitable, it still is. There are many times I'll listen to recordings of my father conducting and realize that no matter how many times I do a certain piece, he still did it better than I did. And I can never quite recapture some of that. I'm not sure that I would be doing what I'm doing if he was still alive. I really don't know. There was always the spirit of competitiveness in the household, and we were, my brother and I, discouraged in many cases from becoming musicians. We felt it's too hard, it's too difficult, and you don't want to go through this. But you wind up going through that. You sort of realize you've got to have this as part of your life, that your life is simply nothing without music, which isn't true, but at least when you're growing up you think that.
In addition to your father's tutelage in the conducting area and the musical area, another name comes to mind that crops up consistently in all the articles that are written about you and about your education, and that's Walter Susskind and how influential he was in your life.
Well, you have to understand that my father died when I was 19 years old, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. That's when the bug about becoming an English teacher of some kind hit. I gradually got myself back into music starting around 1964 and auditioned for the Aspen School, where Mr. Susskind was the teacher. And he more or less became the father figure. He took over. He guided me musically and personally through many very difficult times. But there was another person as well, and he doesn't come up quite so often when I talk. He was the general manager of the Chicago Symphony. His name was John Edwards. He was a great human being, great wit, and virtually saw the entire history of this country in music. He was the person who more or less took over handling the career part of life, just watching out for me, saying, this is what you should do next. Between Mr. Susskind and John Edwards, those two were the ones who gave me, I think, the true inspiration to go seriously into the conducting as a profession.
At 24 years old, you were somewhat nervous when you dealt with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, insofar as the members were concerned, or maybe communicating with them, and even your baton technique. You said there was a certain natural element to it, but you felt like you were a little awkward at times.
Yes.
That's hard to believe
I know.
with a gentleman who is so well versed at this juncture.
I'm always surprised how people always say I'm technically facile, and I used to struggle and think about how hard it was to conduct, and now I don't think about it at all. I think because I became more confident in my music making, that the technique is simply an outgrowth of how you feel about the music. Some of the greatest conductors in the world have actually lousy techniques, absolutely horrible, but their body language and their expressiveness in their face, all these things are what contributed to it. I'm always surprised when people think of me as being a technical whiz. I don't think it at all.
Also, I think you made note of the fact that you were at that time terrified of complicated scores, and even today, you know, might step back from a Mozart, and yet mostly Mozart Festival, the White House performance in the undiscovered Mozart piece. I mean, you don't seem to be afraid of anything now.
Oh, it's not true. I think without specifying a particular piece or composer and all that, all you have to do is go through the repertoire that I do over the course of the year and start going, okay, what is it he doesn't do? But you almost have to do that with any conductor. I've been reading the various Bernstein biographies over the last couple months just to see what they all have to say. Each has their pluses, each has their minuses. But what emerges here for me is that big question: why didn't he do certain things? And if I relate it to myself, it's simply because I feel not so adequate in certain kinds of repertoire. The ultra serialists are still a problem for me. I admire the music. I would rather see people who understand it and feel in sympathy with it conducting it. It doesn't do any good, no matter how critical some members of the press and audience would be, to conduct something when you don't believe in it.
Very true. When you take on an orchestral challenge, St. Louis would be a good example, you like to go in with a developed plan. And I would assume that even now for the 96-97 season, you're developing the repertoire, you're developing the plan, so to speak. Can you share some of that platform with us even now?
Well, we're going to use a thematic approach, not for all concerts, but we're certainly going to be looking over the course of the next few years at tie-ins with other cultural institutions in the district. Certainly Library of Congress, Smithsonian, Corcoran, whatever, because it doesn't make any sense in this relatively small area not to be cooperative with other institutions who can provide us with resource that we don't have, and we can provide them with resource that they don't have. We can be looking specifically for tie-ins with American music. I think we might be facing not a whole season, but a focus on American concerto, or at least the concerto as it developed in this country, both from American composers and non-Americans. I would like to establish a season where we look at children as being a focus, works that were created by young composers, works about children, things like that. So I think these are a few of the ideas we're looking at.
You were quoted in the St. Louis Post when mention was made that you might be taking this job, that there were some things that had to fall into place. You'd have to have a relatively free hand in everything here, which was one of the appealing things at St. Louis, which is why you gravitated there.
Right.
Have they given you pretty much that? Have they said?
Artistically, yes. Artistically, I'm pretty well able to come up with my own plans. They seem to be looking for this set of guidance from the music director. There are restrictions because the Kennedy Center, by the nature of the building itself and the rules under which it operates, cannot do certain things. But we're in the process of trying to go around them a little bit by saying that institutions within the building have got to find ways to cooperate with each other in a greater sense. I haven't been answerable to a whole building before. I haven't had to be responsible for artistic policies as they relate to an entire institution like this. So I'm learning as I go along as well. Course of the next several seasons anyway, and different series we have, that people will think of the center as being a user-friendly place, that it will become a real center, that the soul and heart of artistic life for people living here, people visiting here, will be embodied at the center, and that it will be a resource that people will feel free to come back and use time and time again.
In an age where funding for the arts is increasingly in jeopardy, the modern music director must be more than simply a conductor. Leonard Slatkin shows his mettle on all accounts. Until next time, remember, art was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it.